Before resorting to having artificial intelligence generate these wondrous concepts for us, we would have the capability of envisioning or putting them to life ourselves through the wonders of imagination. After all, imagination is one of life's greatest gifts, and a transformative tool for an artist of any medium where their wildest dreams through passionate diligence could probably perhaps change the world or shatter the pop culture landscape. One of those dreams was born under the filmmaking duo of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Drawing from multiple inspirations such as pulp stories from the 30s and 40s, film serials starring generational icons like the Lone Ranger and Zorro, spaghetti westerns, and Humphrey Bogart's character in The Treasure of Sierra Madre, two of some of Hollywood's most prestigious blockbuster and filmmaking legends of the 70s and 80s would conceive one of the greatest characters in cinematic history, Indiana Jones. Everything we know about the suave, swashbuckling archaeologist with the whip can be found in the beloved trilogy of the 80s. The films have their varying degrees of quality, but each of them have their own strengths while correlating to a central adventurous blueprint that Lucas and Spielberg established so well. And the true apex of the franchise, in one of my favorite movies, at least in my book, that being Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, was the one that cemented itself as Indy's final adventure, culminating with our heroes on horseback riding off into the sunset with a job well done. Until the year 2008, where the disappointment that was Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull arrived in the theaters. And despite having its defenders, it wasn't exactly the film to get fans excited or to have them celebrate the ending chapter of a revered hero that they've known since 1981. And then, 15 years later, Disney and Lucasfilm would declare to produce the final Indiana Jones film in the saga, called Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Because everyone knew how bad Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was, so surely James Mangold, who was the director of Logan, Ford v Ferrari, and the remake of 3:10 to Yuma, could make a movie that is so much better than a film in which Indiana Jones survives a nuclear bomb just by hiding in a refrigerator. Well, before releasing it into theaters and in private screenings in the US, Disney and Lucasfilm decided to make one of the most bizarre decisions that I have ever seen a company make this year by premiering it at, of all places, the Cannes Film Festival in France. You know, like one of the biggest film festivals in the world. And that sounds like quite the gamble. And to the shock of many, it would turns out that they would lose that gamble as the film was met with middling and mediocre review scores. But you know what? Who needs critics, right? Who are they to tell the masses what to think? It's Indiana Jones. But after watching it, those reviews weren't critics being snobby. They were warnings. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is a bad movie, plain and simple. Whereas the original 3 movies had a variety of heart, escapism, and sharp script structure, Dial of Destiny takes everything that made Indiana Jones and his tales so beloved to Hollywood and blast them into smithereens like Renee Bullock at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's especially shocking given the directing talent at hand. However, I'm not entirely convinced that James Mangold was entirely his fault. It feels like it was a movie that was sabotaged by its own producers, deliberately ruining whatever interesting and promising ideas that it could have going for it, while ruining the entire legacy of a generation's hero. But enough of my bemoaning. On with the plot. Dial of Destiny takes us into New York City in 1969, where the city celebrates the return of the astronauts from the moon landing, and Dr. Henry Jones Jr. is entering retirement from his university. While taking time to reflect on his past, he comes across his goddaughter named Helena Shaw, who implores him to go on one last hurrah to find Archimedes' dial, or the Antikythera, which has been lost for over a millennia, that is known to travel through time and to manipulate history. Yeah, it's another movie about time travel. Are you excited? Unbeknownst to them, Jürgen Voller, a former Nazi who worked on the moon landing, and his men scour for the MacGuffin as well, but only for the sole purpose of traveling back to the brink of World War II and rewriting Hitler's mistakes. What I dislike so much about this movie is how it handles its own legacy characters, the worst offender which being one particular individual. In prior Lucasfilm productions, we have been inundated with characters such as a deadbeat Han Solo, Luke Skywalker being a hopeless coward, and in the Dial of Destiny, it's affecting poor Dr. Henry Jones Jr., being a lonesome, miserable, lost, and sullen geriatric who has given up on his life's work, which made him so captivating in the first place. The film has to go out of its way to treat the character with the utmost disrespect, and rather than having Indy return as the hero that we are all familiar with, this time no student finds his work fascinating or takes him seriously. His sense for adventure is gone, he's lost all meaning in his life, he's separated from Marion again, and he's nothing more than a piggyback for a newer, brighter heroine who's so much more better than him in every way and resolves his character conundrums for him rather than having him figure it out on his own, which is something that he is more than capable of doing 4 freaking movies ago. What is with this obsession of making childhood heroes such sad sacks, depleted of all investment towards their life's work, and dour and depressed to the point of being suicidal? And it's not only disrespectful to Harrison Ford, who played that character so well, but it's disrespectful to George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, who made that character so iconic in the first place. But even if his character has been damaged significantly, Harrison Ford's performance as the cherished hero remains unscathed. Dramatically, he is terrific as usual, especially in a scene where he monologues about how he could have prevented his son from going into the Vietnam War. It's an emotionally powerful performance in isolation from the rest of the plot, and he can still pull off the charm of his character back in his prime every now and then. It's just a shame that this is going to be the final movie that puts his legacy to a close. But it can't be just all downside, right? Surely the new characters can pick up the slack, right? Here's the thing, I think Mads Mikkelsen is a terrific actor. Regardless of what any narrative material he's given, he's the kind of actor that can take any role and make something out of nothing. And the rule absolutely applies here. But when compared to the writing of his character compared to other villains such as Renee Ballock from Raiders, Walter Donovan and Elsa from The Last Crusade, and even Spalko from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he's the weakest by a significant margin. Once you hear his entire motivation as to why he wants to rewrite Hitler's mistakes, his plan is quizzical and has such absurd gaps in logic considering how non-functional the mechanics of time travel operates. And even if he were to execute his plan exactly as intended, it just makes you think to yourself, what makes him think that not all of what he is doing is eventually going to bite him in the end? Then at last we have the actual star of the show, Indy's goddaughter, Helena Shaw. If this is what Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy want to usher in as the younger generation's new adventurer that grabs the passed down torch, then they did a terrible job doing it. She's infuriating and condescending. She disrespects her own godfather multiple times while wishing death upon him, despite the fact that he countlessly tells her that he's being framed for a murder he didn't commit, which, by the way, towards the end of the movie, never comes up again. All of her decisions and plans made in the script never fail, and the film is in constant favor of her, and worst of all, only cares about herself and wanting cash to the point of not even giving a damn about human life. The worst example of this is that when they escape from the Nazis' grasp while on a boat, they finally have the artifact that they need, and her, along with her version of Short Round from the Temple of Doom, are wondering how much that they're gonna sell it for. Indiana Jones is distraught and exclaims, rightfully so to the two, that they shouldn't even be happy at all, because it all came at the cost of a friend of his dying, and she couldn't care less. She's too busy wondering what the price tag of the dial is gonna be when she sells it. Meanwhile, Indiana Jones's friend just died! And she's just carrying along like nothing ever happened. She doesn't even reflect on how much of a dense, insensitive woman that she is. And with Helena Shaw, it's not just down to the character either. I haven't seen the show Fleabag. I heard it was a dark comedy, and I heard that it had Phoebe Waller-Bridge on it, and I heard she has done a pretty witty job with her writing and her acting. But the movie tries to insert some of that wit and smugness from her prior comedic roles, and all of it doesn't fit and comes across as irritating and inappropriate rather than charming. Even from the performance alone, Her delivery is one-note snarkiness from beginning to end, and she doesn't have the same amount of gravitas or intrigue like Karen Allen from Raiders of the Lost Ark or Allison Doody from The Last Crusade. One of the things that this movie is bereft of since the first 3 movies was the use of practical effects, which has been a staple for the franchise, especially when pertaining to significant story moments, or in most evident of all, in the action scenes. From both Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade, one of the best moments in those movies was the impeccable, unimaginable stunt work done by the second unit team, in which you have Harrison Ford on horseback chasing or being chased by Nazi trucks and tanks, leading up to him fighting the soldiers on those vehicles up until the scene crescendos with a clever trick or a last-minute escape. In comparison, Dial of Destiny takes all of the shocking and stressful stunt work done in the originals and compounds them all in front of a green screen or have them be heavily filled with CGI. There are instances every now and then where you have vehicles being toppled over or wrecked, and Harrison Ford, at 80 years old, is still committed to doing his own stunts, which is credible on his part. But aside from that, alongside Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, this has some of the most frivolous and tensionless action scenes in the entire franchise. Other than a few moments towards the opening act, not a single scene has weight, suspense, or eye-popping choreography, and there are instances where characters don't get out of situations out of pure luck that is earned. There's also this Rogue One Mandalorian element of applying de-aging effects on top of a body double for a young Indiana Jones. And it looks promising at first glance, but the one thing that really tilted my head is that you had the CGI face of a young Harrison Ford, and yet the voice work is done by the actual aging voice of Harrison Ford of today. So whenever you see this character in the opening sequences of the movie, or whenever he talks, it rips you right out of the illusion because of the uncanniness of it all, especially when the lip syncing doesn't match with the dialogue being said. In addition to the effects and the action, something that was very interesting about the 3 movies that is totally absent as well in this one was the cinematography and the interesting vistas and locales. For some godforsaken reason, whether they're in Tangier or in beautiful places like Sicily, most of the places look unpleasant due to the film being shot in a brown-orange color palette, and there isn't a shot that emphasizes the gorgeousness or the marvel of these locations. Speaking of locations, the production design of the tombs, caves, and ruins are solid enough, even if they don't particularly wow you, such as the Cannon of the Crescent Moon in Last Crusade, the Temple of Doom, or the iconic Peruvian temple in Raiders. As far as story is concerned, the film is littered with a multitude of contrivances and conveniences, such as a character would knock out a Nazi out in the open and nobody even notices the commotion, and worst of all, you would have a character who has never flown a plane before in their entire life who just so happens to know how to operate and fly a plane perfectly fine. Because reasons. Believe me, stuff like this happens over the course of 2 hours and 20 minutes, up until you get to the pathetic excuse of a climax and an ending that leaves such a bad taste in your mouth. And it makes it even more pitiful when you realize that the ending had to be rewritten several times, and this was the ending we got. As our review concludes of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, while it sounds like I have been railing on this movie for as long as I can, the truth is, I can't even get mad at this movie. I feel nothing but apathy and emptiness at the fact that this is even the concluding journey of Indiana Jones. This is the high note that Harrison Ford wants to go off on. The plot has an endless succession of luck and conveniences for our characters to get from one place all the way to another. The characters have regressed from their prior installments or have been straight up poorly written or pointless. The action lacks the traditional spark, and any of the magic that was conveyed in the first 3 Indiana Jones movies have now been rendered into a cynical, antagonistic shadow of itself. Say what you will about Crystal Skull, but it still had Spielberg's Hand of Wonder that made you want to harken back to the good old days. That cannot be said about Dial of Destiny. The most frustrating part about all of this is that this movie had an opening domestically of $60 million. Worldwide, in order to turn a profit, it needs to make between $600 million or $800 million. This is how much money it's making currently. Given how movies such as Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, Barbie, and Oppenheimer are coming right around the corner, it's not gonna make it. Disney is gonna lose millions again. All because one maniac at Lucasfilm thought that committing cultural vandalism would lead them to the box office promised land. Indiana Jones deserved a better send-off. The fans and the audiences deserved a better story, and most of all, Harrison Ford deserved a better fitting conclusion to his legacy of the greatest archaeologist that has ever lived. But to those attempting to watch it themselves, treat it like the Ark of the Covenant, leave it alone, and don't bother looking at what's inside. My name is Luke Nukem, and you, my friends, have been blown away